Good morning, students. Welcome to your online computer lecture. We will begin our online teaching. So I request all the students to kindly remove their computer workbook and also a pencil. I hope we all are ready by now. So let us begin. Kindly open page number 41, chapter number 5, History of Computers. Now, as we all know, students, that we see uses of computer in various fields. We need no introduction to computer or what a computer is in today's generation. However, it is very important to learn or know about the history of computers, as it will help us to understand how fast and efficient changes occurred in the field of technology, which is known as the advancement. So let us begin with our chapter number 5, History of Computers. Introduction. To compute means to calculate. Computer means the machine which can compute. No doubt, the first calculating machine were our fingers, then stone, rose on ground, etc. As calculations became more complicated, the abacus was developed. It consists of rows of beads strung on rods, 5 by 2 rows and 10 column beads. It was popular that time for addition, subtraction and multiplication. So the introduction part talks about the computer, the introduction, the definition. What do you mean by computer? Computer is nothing but it is used to compute. And compute means to calculate. And before the machine was introduced, we humans in ancient times used our fingers to calculate. Then stones were used. Later on, we also started writing on the walls with the help of a marker or something that can be identified easily on the wall. We started counting in that pattern. However, abacus, one of the device known as abacus, was developed, which consists of certain rows, beads, columns, strings. During that time, it was much popular. When the machine were introduced, what's the use of or the purpose of the machine? Machines are nothing but it makes a man's work easy. So as calculations were becoming difficult, abacus was invented. So let's take a look at the development stages. In the 17th century, after the Renaissance in Europe, science, commerce and manufacturing began to advance quickly. To meet those complicated calculations, right? So in the 17th century, after the Renaissance in Europe, after the changes that took place during the 17th century, science and commerce and manufacturing began to advance very quickly. We saw a rapid growth in the development. After the 17th century, we started evolving. So to meet those complicated calculations, right, since science, commerce and manufacturing were introduced and slowly it started taking place. So the calculations were complicated. It became tedious or difficult to manage those calculations with the help of fingertips or with the help of abacus. So John Napier discovered the logarithm method to do multiplication and division. The instrument was 10 bone stripes, each with 9 divisions, and number printed on all four sides as Napier's rod. So this person, John Napier, discovered the logarithm method to do multiplications and divisions, and it describes how that device or the instrument was. It comprised of 10 bone stripes, each with 9 divisions and number printed on all four sides. It was known as Napier's rod. The first fairly reliable calculator to be marketed commercially was invented in 1642. It was a geared instrument which can add and subtract, named Pascaline. The inventor, Pascal, a French youth, was only 19 years old. Afterwards, it was improved by Leibniz, a German mathematician, so that it can find even square roots. We are looking at the year 1642. We saw the invention of Pascaline. The Pascaline is a device which consists of certain gears and strings. And who invented Pascaline? It was a French guy named. So who was Pascal? He was just a youth, a French mathematician who was 19 years old when he invented Pascaline. Further on, there was a person named Leibniz, who was again a French or German mathematician. Sorry, I correct myself. Leibniz was a German mathematician who enhanced Pascaline so that it can even find square roots. So abacus was introduced first as a calculating machine. Then came the logarithm method. Then came Pascaline. Let's understand what's in the next paragraph. The work done by Charles Babbage in the 19th century marks the next major development in history of computing. In 1821, he designed different engine, and in 1832, analytical engine. The inputs of those machines were based on the cards which Joseph Jacquard had developed for his automated weaving looms in 1820. This paragraph talks about two other people. The first one is Charles Babbage. Charles Babbage is also known as the father of modern computing. Why? Because of his major development or contribution in the history of computing, when he designed different engine in 1821, and then in 1832 he came up with analytical engine. From here began the input-output processing unit with the help of Joseph Jacquard, who had invented who had developed automated weaving machine or these cards were also known as the network cards or the input cards. Now Joseph had developed this automated weaving looms in 1820. So when he invented, he was not aware that these cards can be used as an input method until the analytical engine were introduced. Let us continue further. Name were mechanical. followed by him use the same card work on more people to think about programmable. So slowly and gradually, as we started moving towards development and the use of technology, our hunger for more advancement began. We thought, why not we develop machines which would be electrical instead of mechanical? Why not we should program it, and the machine should also have some memory. Right. So these led the invention of the computers. The history of computers began. So before we look into the generation of the computers, as in the first introduction part, we learned about introduction and development, with starting with the abacus, then the Napier's rod, and the Pascaline. Let's take a look at this. As you can see, the first picture, abacus. The second is the John Napier's log table. The third is a Pascal's machine, which is known as the Pascaline. So abacus, as you can see, it's separated by the strings, the rods and the beads. And the log table, similarly as the Pascaline machine. This is just for you to understand in the pictorial form as to what is an abacus, what is a log table, and what is a Pascaline. So let's now look at the generations. (1943 to 1955). One of the first machine that could be called a computer was the Mark I, built at IBM by Howard Aiken between 1939 to 1944. The first line of the first statement says, one of the first machine that could be called as a computer was the Mark I. It was built at IBM. Now, what is IBM? IBM is a company which stands for International Business Machines. It's a company which manufactures various types of machines, majorly computers. That's International Business Machines. And the name of the person who built Mark I was Howard Aiken in the year 1939 to 1944, a span of 5 years. In 1943, P. Eckert and John Mauchly, the American scientists, developed the ENIAC, that stands for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Calculator. They used vacuum tubes and valves. Hence, the machine was occupying 2 to 3 rooms and weighing 30 tons. It also needed a great amount of electricity and emitted excessive heat. Air conditioning was essential to cool it down. Apart from these drawbacks, it was the fastest machine at that time, as it could perform 5,000 additions and 400 multiplications per second. USA Army used this computer till 1955. So if you go back to this period, 1943, two people or two person, P. Eckert and John Mauchly. These were two American scientists. They developed one of the computer named ENIAC. ENIAC stands for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Calculator. Now, when these machines were developed, or these ENIAC computers were developed, they used vacuum tubes and valves. You may have seen in earlier days when we had those big monitors like CRTs, cathode ray monitors. We used to have a vacuum tube inside, wherein a beam of light used to pass from the back of the tube to the front of the tube, emitting it on the screen. Similarly, in the computers, there were vacuum tubes and valves used, and these machines were so huge that it required 2 to 3 rooms to occupy. And the weight of these machines used to be in tons, like 30 tons. It also needed great amount of electricity and emitted excessive heat. We may have experienced, students. The electronic device, if we run for a longer time, it gets heated up and it consumes a lot of electricity. Our cell phone, for example, if we continuously use our cell phone for a longer period of time, the cell phone gets heated. Similarly, even a computer gets heated due to continuous supply of electricity and the applications or the programs being in used. So it's of utmost importance, or it's necessary to cool these machines down. So eventually this began from the invention of the computers. The machines need to be cooled down. There were few drawbacks, as we were inventing machines, computers. So it became utmost important. There were certain upcomings, drawbacks, learnings. Still, despite of the drawbacks or the outcomes, these machines were the fastest because they could perform 5,000 additions and 400 multiplications per second. USA Army used this computer till 1955. The first set of networks that was developed was known as ARPANET. That was used by the US military system in order to communicate with the other bases or other nodes at far off locations. Take a look at this. In the picture, you can see how big the computers were, right? The time period may vary, so do not get confused with the time period. Just try to understand or look at the picture to understand how the first generation computers looked. The kind of technology used were vacuum tubes. Processing was slow. This is how first generation computers looked like. Let us turn our page to see what the second generation of the computer is. We have the period from 1956 to 1963. In 1948, John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley invented a transistor. It replaced the vacuum tubes. It consumes less electricity, small in shape, working. With the transistors, so in the year 1948, 3 people they invented with the a vacuum glass pretty heavy. They're light in weight. Working became fast. We saw during working was reduction in electricity released due to as we I would want cell phones introduced. Why? Because which were incoming calls, and hardly people used the communicating device mobile. Now if you look at today's generation, we see mobile in every house. Every person has a mobile. Like students like you all, if not every individual has a cell phone. We can see that. Right. Now the cell phones have become smart. We call them as smartphones with the help of touch screen and many other works apart from incoming and receiving calls. We have a lot of work that we can do with the cell phone. So these are now smartphones. Similarly, when in the first generations, the computers that were developed which used vacuum tubes, so eventually we learned from those generation. We tried to minimize everything, and in the second generation, after transistors came into invention, these computers became more reliable and accurate. More dependency and more accuracy started coming in. They were compact in size, the size reduced with the help of transistors. Since they consumed less electricity, the heat generation was also negligible. We won't say there was no generation of heat, but there was less generation. It became negligible. These computers became cheaper due to reduction in electricity consumption. The storage capacity was also increased. Why? Because of the use of magnetic tape and drums. Now these terminologies or the terms magnetic tapes, drums have different meaning in the computer language. We will try to understand them further. Prior to that, let's take a look at the second generation computers. See the picture, guys. In the first generation, we saw almost the room was covered. In the second, you see the reduction in size. Smaller size, technology, transistor, processing was faster. Let's continue further with the third generation. Third generation, 1964 to 1969. Scientists succeeded further in compacting an entire circuitry by replacing hundreds of transistors and other electronic components in a single piece of silicon called chip. These integrated circuit technology advanced further. LSI, large scale integration, which contains about 100 electronic components. Second, VLSI, very large scale integration, contains thousands of electronic components. And the third, SVLSI, super very large scale integration. These computers were called mini computers. The computer was designed to meet the requirement of scientific computing as well as business data processing. Alright, so the third generation, which began from 1964 to 69, saw a revolution. A revolutionary change in the world of computers began. Why? We came up with the chip system, integrated circuits or integrated chips. Now what these chips? Not those eating chips, students. But these chips were, if you want to relate, we can say like these chips, as we consume chips, similarly these chips consumed transistors. They converted hundreds of thousands of transistors into one single chip. Right. So here's the revolution began. We started developing the integrated circuits, the integrated chips, which advanced further into three categories. First, we had large scale integration, which would contain around or about 100 electronic components. Then followed by VLSI, very large scale integration. From 100 it moved on to 1000. And then SVLSI, super very large scale integration. These computers were called as mini computers. And the basic purpose or the main idea or the main ideology behind these computers were in the field of science, research and development. For scientific computing, for scientific purposes, these computers were used. What were the features? Semiconductors were introduced, monitor and line printer were introduced, the operating system software was introduced. Three things got introduced. Semiconductors, you may have learned this in science. What are semiconductors? Monitor and line printer were introduced. The operating system software was introduced. So in the first generation we saw vacuum tubes. Second generation took over with the help of transistors, and then transistors got integrated on the chip. More than thousands of chips got integrated on the chip. In the picture you can see how an IC or an integrated circuit or a chip would look like or looks like. These chips will incorporate small or many multiple transistors. As in when the generation of computers advanced, the speed increased and the size reduced. In this third generation, what was the technology? ICs, like integrated circuits. Now let's take a look at the fourth generation, which is from 1970 to 1985. Scientists were able to convert many chips of VLSI technology, which were used for different functions, into a single chip. This one chip can perform all functions of CPU. It is called as microprocessor. Hence, this generation computers were called as microcomputers. We don't need an introduction to what microcomputers are. However, we need to know when did this begin, or from which generation microprocessors or central processing unit came into existence. It happened in fourth generation. Wherein scientists were eager. As we know, scientists, they keep on experimenting. The more you experiment, the better are the chances of you getting success. So with lot of experiments and lot of brainstorming, these chips of very large scale integration technology were accumulated, or they got compressed into a one single chip, which was called as microprocessor, or the CPU, Central Processing Unit. So which generation of computer are called as microcomputers? It's the fourth generation of computers. Okay. So the features of this generation computers were: microprocessor chip was introduced. It helped to develop the personal computer. Keyboard and floppy drives were introduced. These computers can work without air conditioners because very little heat was generated during the computer operation. Graphics were introduced. Different types of printers were developed. So around the period of 1970 to 1985, in the span of 15 to 20 years, the biggest change started taking place. Those integrated circuits got reduced and they were compressed into a single chip called as microprocessors. So the computers that we use today are also microprocessor computers, or the fourth generation computers that we are using. Not only microprocessor were introduced, but keyboard and floppy drives, they were also introduced. And since these computers were taking less electricity, or were working on, or they consumed less electricity, so less amount of heat was generated. We didn't require air conditions to cool the machines down. Graphics, as we all know, the video that we see, high definition, VGA, like video graphic array, and now we have high definition, then we have ultra HD, right? The 4K technology. So these kind of technologies also helped in computers. Graphics are mostly or majorly used in animation, movies, or playing games. And also different types of printers were developed. We have studied different types of printer, like dot matrix printer, inkjet printer, laser printer, and many more. So in fourth generation, we saw all these upcoming devices. On page number 43, we continue reading. Storage capacity was enhanced by introducing hard disk. Network of computers was achieved with communication technology. The processing speed was improved by a million times than that of the first generation. Okay. So as we look further about fourth generation computers, the storage capacity was enhanced. Why? As in previous generations, we did not have the storing capacity or the memory. Less of storage was available. Hence, in fourth generation, the introduction of hard disk also came in, which helps us to store a lot of data on our computer. We have seen hard drives ranging from 64 GB to 1 terabytes. Network of computers was achieved. Network again. What is a network? Various devices that are connected to each other for sharing of information and resources. So as I told you all about ARPANET, that was the first network computer that was set up by the US military so that they can communicate between each other. The processing speed was improved by a million times. As we saw, the first generation computers, they were huge and slow in processing. As and when we moved towards advancement in fourth generation, the processing speed was increased and the size was reduced. These are the fourth generation computers. You see in the picture, very large scale integration. So that's how the size of the computers were. In 1985 onwards, due to introduction of internet, artificial intelligence and multimedia attachments to computer, we can say that we are using the fifth generation computers. Now there is another generation which is the fifth generation of our computers. We can say we are using a combination of fourth and fifth generation together, as fifth generation computers also include artificial intelligence, which is the future technology. As we are working on improvement on artificial intelligence, it will get enhanced and it will be available in future generation. We all are introduced to internet, we all know how to use internet, yet we are not all aware of artificial intelligence. Just to give you an example, we may have watched the movie Robot, Chitti, remember? Right. That's one of the example of artificial intelligence. That is our upcoming future. So these are how fifth generation computers are. Okay. Present and future technology, artificial intelligence, and many more to come in. So to quickly summarize this in a pictorial format, students. This is how the first generation looked like. Big rooms, then the size reduced in the second generation. Again, smaller size in third, even more smaller in fourth, and the fifth generation, the advanced computers. So as and when the time passed, we evolved in the world of technology and computers. So with this, students, we complete our chapter number 5, History of Computers. We just got introduced to what computer was, and we saw the development phases from first generation. Before the first generations, we saw the development of the abacus, then the Napier's rod, and the Pascal line, and the analytical engine, the punch card reader. Then we looked at the first generation computers, which used vacuum tubes. Second generation used transistors. In the third generation, we introduced integrated circuits. Fourth generation, processors, which were also known as microprocessors. And now the fifth generation, along with microprocessing, it's artificial intelligence. Remember this. I will send you the notes accordingly. Now in the notes section, you may have seen, guys, I have underlined few words and sentences. I request you all to write this in your notebook. And until our next lecture, stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you very much for your time. Have a nice day, students. Thank you.